can start whenever you're ready.
Hello, today I will be discussing the topic of the impact of product placement on adolescents. Product placement can be defined as placing a brand in media content to affect consumer behavior. Within the industry, it's a rather unclear beginning to this practice. A lot of my research sources couldn't agree. Some said that Thomas Edison began the practice, whereas other people decided that the 1982 movie E.T. was a major kickoff for the industry. You can see the alien is interacting with Reese's Pieces within it. And after the movie was produced, Reese's Pieces saw a big boom within their sales. And then other companies began to recognize this and wanted to partake in that as well. So for my literature review, I focused on three main factors. The first one was the different types of placement. And throughout research, I found out that the prominence of the products on the screen was correlated to the effectiveness of that product and influenced future purchase consumption. And so there were four main types of product placement within the industry. First of all, there is character product interaction, or CPI, background placement, incorporated within the plot, or the brand name being said. And this is character product interaction proved to be the most prominent and the most effective throughout the industry. The second factor I looked at was advertising specifically to adults and children. With most advertisements, the marketing strategies are geared directly toward adults because they are the ones with the money, they're the ones that are going to be purchasing the products, and there's many ways that they can target these adults, whether it's on billboards, it's in commercials, it can be in social media ads, in newspaper ads. So a lot of times many products and brands will gear their advertisements directly toward adults. But then the second targeted demographic is children. And children they have the unique opportunity to persuade their parents to buy these things, and they're also very easy to target. You can tell exactly where a child is going to be and see these advertisements, whether it's the back of cereal boxes or it can be in between cartoons, and it's very easy to makeshift these advertisements to gear directly toward children, whether it's with bright colors, humor, anything like that. But I saw within this factor in particular that teenagers were being neglected within the industry because it's really hard to target them directly. Teenagers they can be on the highway and see a billboard, but they can also be eating cereal in the morning and look at the back of a cereal box. It's very hard to pinpoint exactly where you're going to reach a teenager demographic, and that's why I think that they're neglected within the industry as well. And then the final factor within my literature review was the buying habits of adolescents. Myself being an adolescent and my peers around me, I know that we tend to have some impulse buying tendencies, and I wanted to research that further as well. And so an impulse purchase can be defined as a sudden and powerful urge that arises within the consumer to buy immediately. So it's no secret that within college students, the stereotypical, you'll get a credit card, you'll go into credit card debt, and that's just the way it is. And so a study by Lu Chi Kit and Elizabeth Lim Kui Ping, titled The Effectiveness of Product Placement, the Influence of Product Placement Toward Consumer Behavior of the Millennial Generation, tested this, and they came to the conclusion that college-aged kids often have obsessive buying behavior, and this is due to external motivations that they have while they're purchasing things. They likely act on wants rather than necessities, and this is because of influence from their peers, from the media. They want to be trendy, they want to be cool, and this will influence them to purchase immediately because of those emotions and because of those feelings tied to it. Throughout my research process, I came across this seminal source, The Hidden History of Product Placement. It's by Jay Newell, Susan Chang, and Charles Salmon. It was taken from the Journal of Broadcasting and Electronic Media, and it was produced in December of 2006. This source in particular kicked off my research as well as other sources that I incorporated into my research process. It provided definitions, context, and motivations as well as future expectations for the industry. I used it a lot within my paper as the introduction, and it really kicked off the broad scope of what product placement is, how it's used in the industry, and where it's going. And then after I was able to understand all of that, I was able to put it with other factors as well. Completing my research process, I came across two main gaps within the field. The first one being adolescents, specifically aged 14 to 18 years old. This was interesting to me because one of my sources declared that teenagers are the most active group of moviegoers, and so I thought it was interesting that product placement isn't researching the most targeted demographic of their industry. And then a second gap I found was the participants' own perceptions on their behavior. So a lot of the studies, they focused around putting variables together, experimenting on their participants, looking at their behavior and all these things, but they weren't asking them what they thought they were doing or how they thought that they were behaving in these circumstances. So that led me to the research question, perception versus reality, adolescents' belief on if they're impacted by product placement. With that came my hypothesis. I began with teenagers' perception. I thought that they would not think that they are impacted by product placement. That's just teenagers not being reflective of their own actions. That's just what I inferred would happen. And then I thought the reality side of it was that due to their impulse buying habits, it will cause them to be more susceptible to these product placements and convince them to purchase more products that they see within their movies. To test this hypothesis, I conducted a study, and with that study I used a mixed methodology approach. I started off with a content analysis and then followed that with a correlational survey. So I started off with the content analysis. That was the primal method used because I need to collect the data to then use it in essential questions in the correlational survey afterward. I used 8 movies within my content analysis. There were 2 from each of the genres romance, sci-fi, mystery or thriller, and action-adventure. There was a lot of criteria I put on each of the movies in order to reduce limitations. Some of those criteria being that each of the movies had to be PG-13 and produced between 2010 to 2021. This was in order to ensure that the participants would have been the targeted demographic when they viewed the movie. And then I also, to ensure the likelihood that they had seen the movie and the likeliness of the movie, I turned to a very respected movie review website, which was Rotten Tomatoes, and I placed that each movie had to have 85% or higher on the audience rating score and then at least 10,000 reviews. And then the data that I collected from the content analysis was which brands or products were seen and how they were placed. Again, those were either character-product interaction in the background, used within the plot, or the brand name being said by one of the characters. Following the content analysis, I did a correlational survey. This survey was sent out to high school students in a mid-sized urban high school. And I had 171 participants aged 14 to 18 years old. The questions were centered around demographic information, movie consumption, notice and temptation of product placement, as well as their perceived impulse buying habits. And then I used the content analysis data within that as well. A mixed methodology approach, starting with content analysis, moving on to correlational survey, was the best method to conduct this survey, as it provided me raw and explicit information to use when manipulating the data later on. Being a part of the same demographic population that I was studying, I was able to conduct a content analysis as one of the participants. I was able to look and grab all the products that I was able to see, viewing it as a member of the studied population. As well as with the correlational survey, it was easy to gather the perception directly from the source of the adolescents and then simultaneously test that with the reality portion of my question. So moving on to my results, this first table represents the perception part of my question. The first question that was asked in my survey was, when watching a movie, how often will you notice a product placement? And then that was tied with how many times have you actually purchased a product after seeing it in a movie. And as you can see on the data table here, out of 131 people that said that they noticed product placement, only 40 of them said that they actually purchased it. So this is based on the participants' own reflection of their actions, and it follows my hypothesis because it shows that according to teenagers, when they notice a product, they don't purchase it. Moving on, these two graphs as well tie to the perception element as well. The first question asked is, how many times have you been tempted to purchase a product seen in a movie? And as you can see on the pie graph here, 45.3% say that they have, whereas 54.7% say that they haven't. This is pretty evenly split, however it is citing on that they haven't been tempted by a product placement before, which gears to my hypothesis as well. And then I wanted to tie that question with the one asked earlier of how many times have you actually purchased a product after seeing it in a movie. And it shows a pretty drastic difference where 27% say that they have, whereas 73% say that they haven't. And again, this just ties directly with that hypothesis that teenagers perceive themselves as not being influenced by product placement when they notice it or when they're tempted by it. Moving on to the reality portion of my question, these questions stemmed from the content analysis data. In the correlational survey, I listed all of the movies that I had within my content analysis and asked them which ones they had seen. And then I also asked the question, do you recall seeing any of the following brands in the movies mentioned earlier? And so I listed all of the brands that I saw within summarizing categories and asked them to check all that applied. And then I also asked the following question of which brands are you most likely to purchase, and I gave the same summarizing categories with the most used product placement within those categories. And basically when putting those two variables together, I saw a positive 0.468 correlation. And so it was shown that between the two variables there was correlating evidence that they had seen products that they had said and admitted that they wanted to purchase at some point. But then I put those two together on this pie chart, and it said that 47.6% say that they did see a product that they would purchase, whereas 52.4% say that they did not. So this does not directly follow the hypothesis, but it's pretty evenly split, and I think that with some further research, a greater sample size, or more time in different worded questions, that it would be able to flip in the future. Moving on to the limitations, every study has its own group of limitations that come with it. First of all, being a content analysis, I was, as the conductor, the only one dragging placements from the movies themselves, and there could have been some conductor error within that as well. I'm human, I get distracted, and I could have missed a couple placements here or there. And then to go on with that, I ran into this limitation while doing the content analysis, especially within the sci-fi movies. There was a lack of placement within them. I would watch an entire movie and see only one or two products that would be incorporated into that correlational survey later, which was just pretty annoying, but just something that I had to live with. The movies were really hard to choose based on all the criteria. It took a long time and I had to be pretty selective with the process, so that's just a limitation that we have to live with for this study. And then moving on to the correlational survey, a major limitation was the participant memory. There wasn't a great way to ask the participants when they viewed the movie, how long it had been, because a lot of times there's just forgetfulness in that area. And so I put in the criteria in order to reduce these limitations, that they would be the age of the study population when they viewed the movie, but there was no guarantee within it whatsoever. And then also with the correlational survey, with any survey, there's going to be participant self-assured bias, and so just lying on a question, not being truthful, that comes with any study that you're going to do. Then the conclusions of my study were that due to the correlation found in the reality portion of my study, that teenagers are influenced by product placements despite their own perceptions. It's not as strong as I thought, but I think that with further research it could definitely help to sway the status. Moving on to implications of this study, studying teenagers, which is also the most active group of moviegoers, then goes to justify and solidify reasoning for the expense of the product placement industry. The product placement industry can be fairly expensive. It was from 2007 to 2010 expected to grow $2.7 billion. And so studying this population and seeing that it works, and that just justifies for companies, hey, continue using this practice, it's working, it's worth your money. And then another implication I came across was by looking at the teenagers' own perception on how they view themselves, how they view their habits, then leads to future advertisements helping them to be more effective by playing to that psychology, playing to that role of the teenage mind as well. And so it can help in the future for them to be more effective with their advertisements.
Great. In the 5 minutes that we have left, We have 3 questions for you. Your first question is, how did the choices you made when designing or implementing your research method impact your research process?
Yeah, so choosing to do a mixed methodology definitely impacted the research process quite a bit because starting with the content analysis, again with that movie criteria, it was really difficult to get the movies, decide how many I needed to do, and then what the best criteria for each one was. And then it also turned into a time issue because I had to complete that content analysis before moving into my correlational survey, which could have messed up the organization of things a little bit because I was trying to work on them simultaneously, but I wasn't able to. And so that's just how choosing the mixed methodology definitely impacted my research process the most.
And our second question?
Okay, how did the limitations of your method or data influence your new understanding?
Yeah, so the main limitation being conductor error that I came across. Being part of the studied population, I would definitely was distracted by my phone, distracted by my peers, and so that led me to believe that within a real world case scenario, teenagers are going to be distracted. They're not going to see every placement, especially with the varying levels of prominence, and so it is important that companies continue to use this practice and continue to partake in it. However, it is a little bit of a gamble for them, and that's what I realized while I was conducting my survey, and with that limitation being the conductor error.
And our third question?
Think back to your initial curiosity that sparked your inquiry. What other curiosities do you have, and how has this process prepared you to explore them?
Yeah, so my initial curiosity was advertising to teenagers specifically, as seen in my second factor during the literature review. It's hard to pinpoint teenagers specifically, and that was really interesting to me because I know how easily influenced teenagers are. I'm one of them, my peers are them, and so that was my initial curiosity. But then after conducting this study, I'm still interested in how the marketing world will use this information to their advantage, and also how this can go beyond movies and product placement. Like, there's a big phenomenon right now with influencers and social media using their popularity to enhance these products and getting paid to do so. So that's a big curiosity for me as well that takes the baseline of this study and then continues that even further.